Hey, this is John with FixYourDirtBike.com. This is a step-by-step video to show you how to replace the front wheel bearings on your dirt bike. But first, let's make sure you actually need to replace them. To test your bearings, put your dirt bike on a stand with the front wheel off the ground. Remove the front brake caliper and hang it out of the way. This is an important step because a dragging brake can drown out bearing noise, or worse, make you think your bearings are bad and you waste time and money fixing what isn't broken. To start, double check that your axle nut and pinch bolts are torqued correctly. Give your wheel a strong spin, then watch and listen. If you don't hear anything and your wheel spins free, your bearings are fine, and you can go watch a different video. If you hear ticking, clicking, grinding, or the wheel seems to catch on something, your bearings are shot. When your wheel is slowing down, pay attention to how it actually stops. If it stops abruptly, your bearings are shot. Side note, the main cause of bearing failure is seal failure, so make sure to check those seals before you ride. Tools. The tools you will need are a long drift, in this case I used a tire iron, a hammer, a socket that matches the inside bearing race, the socket that matches the outside bearing race, a propane torch, some wood, rubber gloves, regular gloves, and of course, eye protection. The parts you will need are a set of new bearings and seals, and a bucket of grease. If you need parts, click the link below. Throughout this video, I will be referring to the left and right side of the wheel as it would be mounted on your bike, so the brake disc would be the left side. Bearing removal. Place your dirt bike on a stand, remove the front wheel, and remove the old bearing seals. Insert the drift from the right side of the hub up to, but not touching, the left bearing. Pull and push your drift up and down to push the distance collar away from the inner bearing race. Place the wheel on some 2x4s, with the first bearing facing up, and only the rim and tires touching the wood. You will be hammering fairly hard, so make sure you are on a steady surface. Heat the hub with your propane torch so it expands and takes some pressure off the bearing. Keep the heat even as you go. One pass should be 1 Mississippi. Heat the hub for 60 Mississippi or until you start to see a little smoke. Turn the wheel over, place a socket over the inner race bearing, and hammer the opposite bearing out. Reheat your hub as needed. There is no telling how the bearing will come out. They may come out in one piece, or they might shatter like this one did. If your second bearing is still intact, repeat the heating process, flip your wheel, and hammer the bearing out with your socket on an extension. Maintenance. Inspect each part of the hub assembly for wear, pits, or burrs. If you find any rough areas, file them down to smooth. Do not remove material from the ends of the distance collars, as they need to be an exact length. If the ends are damaged, replace the collar. After you remove any damage, sand everything with 220 grit sandpaper to make sure every contact surface is as clean as possible. If you want to go all in, you could even follow that with some steel wool. As you can see here, this is what impatience looks like. The previous owner thought the collar guide was part of the bearings and tried to pound it out. In fact, I know that's what happened because I had done that exact same thing. If you find this inside your hub, file what you can and make sure the bearing and seal bore are as smooth as possible. Finally, take your new bearings and make sure they don't fit. These bearings are a driven fit, so if they slip into the hub on their own, the hub is worn and needs to be replaced. In this case, the left bore is a loose fit at first, but tightens up farther in. This will still work, but this is probably the last bearing change this hub can take. To see how all the parts of the hub work together, check out my video on how a front wheel hub works. Bearing installation. Some bearings are pre-greased and double shielded like these from Factory Links. And, like the old bearings, some are only shielded on one side. You will need to grease these bearings before installation. Single shield bearings need to be installed with the shield facing out. Place your wheel on a piece of wood so only the hub is supported. Place your first bearing as flush as possible against the hub. Use a socket that is big enough to match the outer bearing race, but will still fit into the bore to start tapping the bearing into place. Once the bearing starts to seat, check to make sure it is square to the bore. You can make small adjustment taps as you need. Continue to drive the bearing into the bore until it is seated. Flip your wheel and insert the distance collar. Repeat the driving process until the bearing is flush with the bore. Insert the axle into the opposite side of the hub to align the collar to the bearings. As you can see, the axle is too long for a socket, so build up a base with wood to support the hub and let the axle sit lower. Make sure the axle is still tight in the collar and bearings. Finish driving the bearing into the bore, then remove the axle. Apply a good amount of grease to the seal bore and install your new seals. If your seals contain a retaining spring, make sure it is facing in. Reinstall your wheel and brake caliper and go for a ride. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe.